Eeny meeny miny mo. These dice are super tiny, yo. I'm a little impressed, honestly, but it's no big deal. I had small expectations. I hope you can hear me alright through my microphone, so I can tell you about how these dice have and have not grown on me. I was making a short list of puns to add to this intro, but I came up short on ideas, so you'll have to micromanage. It had been a while since we had taken a look at any pre-made dice molds, and so I wanted to take a look at some new and unique ones by Sophie and Toffee. There's some of the more well-known pre-made dice mold makers out there, and I've reviewed their stuff on this channel before. I ordered a couple of different things from them. I ordered their new Dice Vault mold, as well as their improved version of their cap molds that were improved based upon feedback that I and others gave them. So, if you're interested in taking a look at some of those, let me know in the comments down below, because today we're predominantly going to be focusing on this mini dice mold set here and not the other two that I've gotten. But if you're interested, I'll happily do a video on those. Let's get one thing out of the way. These dice are freaking tiny. They are 8 millimeters. The whole mold looks to be about the size of a Twix bar, so in my head I've been calling this my Twix mold the entire time. You can tell this mold was made over a 3D printed material by the build lines that you can see in the silicone, which, depending on the resolution, may affect some of the results that we're going to see in these dice down the line, but I'll talk about that later. There's a groove that runs along the outer edge of this mold where both sides of the molds actually click in together and excess resin can pool. After the two halves pop into place, there's sprue holes there for you to put the resin down inside the molds, and I was really worried about gaps and resin leaking out of this mold as I was using it. You can see here it really looks like there are some, but that never actually comes into play, so the mold does a good job of not leaking. The shape of this mold is very similar to the Royal mold system by Kingsfell. It's not like it's a proprietary mold styling. I've seen other ones like this before, but if you're looking for something that's similar, this is essentially a scaled down version of that. I'm going to mix up some Envirotex light casting resin, and you might be thinking that Sophie and Toffee molds are designed for UV resin, and you're totally right, but we're going to test that later. I want to start with some regular casting resin. The S&T website says you should be able to use both types of resin, so we're going to test both types of resin. And for this type, we're going to be using Mad Mica's Tequila Sunrise mica powder for a lovely orange color. You'll notice I was using a lot of oranges and purples in this video because this was right around the time of Halloween. After we're done mixing that all up, we can go ahead and get the resin in the mold. I always recommend putting some wax paper or freezer paper down in case you have a leak, and I'm going to use a pipette to get it down inside the mold. The video on their website shows them using a needle nose injector, but I really don't think that that's necessary here because I'm going to be using a pressure pot, and I don't think it's going to matter for the UV resin either, and I'll show you why here in a little bit. The pipette is actually perfect because it holds 3 milliliters of liquid, and this really takes about 3 milliliters to fill all the way up with resin. I always overfill, that way it can actually pull resin down into the molds as I'm using the pressure pot, and I think that's important here. I would always overfill pretty much any mold, but especially anything that I'm using a pressure pot on. The pressure pot is actually going to do us huge favors here on this mold because any bubble that is stuck down in the mold is going to look huge on such a tiny die, and it could ruin the entire thing by just having one extremely small bubble. So I set the molds as well as some excess resin that I put on the little miniature base runoff molds that I have into the pressure pot, and I set it to 40 psi. I leave it in there for the entire resin cure time, and after I'm done, I can pull them out of the little Twix mold here. You can see after I pull the mold out, I really was worried about leaks, but it just doesn't happen. There's no leaks on the bottom of it, and this is a really well-made mold for preventing leaks. Now, as far as the actual dice when they come out of the mold, there is a huge amount of flashing, which I was expecting. Flashing is just where there is resin that comes around the edges on all of the die, like you can see here. Now, a lot of flashing isn't in itself a bad thing. However, for dice that are this small, it very much can be, because depending on how thick the flashing is, that will leave a large ledge from one face of the die to the next, and when they're this tiny, that looks pretty giant by comparison. So I'm going to remove the flashing as best I can with my X-Acto knife, but you can still see there are large ledges between the faces here, and it just doesn't look all that good. That difference could be where the resolution of the 3D prints comes into play, but I want to be fair, so I'm going to go ahead and give this a second shot with its AB type resin, and go ahead and mix up some with this Briaree's purple alcohol ink. I'm going to do it this way so that it's more transparent and we can see the dice in better detail up close, and we can see if the flashing really does make a huge difference. So we're going to do the same exact steps that we did before. We're going to mix up the resin, fill up a pipette, fill up each individual die in this dice mold, and pour enough resin over the top to where when the pressure pot reduces the bubbles that you can see from the transparent sides in there do exist, the resin will be able to pull down inside and fill up those voids. So after that's all set up, we go ahead and put the molds into the pressure pot, again at 40 psi for the entire cure duration, and we have the dice looking mighty nice as we pull them out. With round 2 complete and these nice looking transparent dice, we still have extremely large ledges from one face to another once we get rid of that flashing. Now that's relative compared to a larger die, but these are smaller die, and so it doesn't look very good whenever you see so many ledges like that. And so I do have a problem with that, and I think that there could be some improvements for AB resin on this mold. But let's move on to the problems that I have on UV resin for this mold. I'm going to try a couple brands of UV resin like this Signature Crafts Light Cure resin to make sure that it's not a problem with any one brand, and I'm just going to stick it in there like I did the pipette. You can already see that there's problems creating voids where there are large bubbles down in there where the resin is not getting to. Again, they use a needle nose applicator to fix this problem, but I'll show you in a minute why I don't think that matters. So instead, I open the mold and go ahead and put resin in sideways and remove any bubbles that are in there and try and close it that way. The first time I do that, I let all the resin actually spill out onto the side because I was trying to close it, you know, sideways, so that's not going to work. So I do the same thing again, making sure that I don't have any bubbles. This time, instead of closing it sideways, I'm going to aim it right side up and seal it. That way, if any resin goes out the top, it's just going to get sucked right back down in through the sprue holes there. Now, because I'm using UV resin, I need to cure it with UV lights. I have a little flashlight here that I could use. However, I don't want to sit there and hold it for very long. So I've also made a UV curing box for my 3D prints, and it will work for this application just as well as it will for 3D prints. It is just a box filled with UV LEDs and a little UV powered turntable, so I can leave this in there and set it and forget it for 5 minutes, and then it will be fully cured. After the first set of UV resin dice were done, I'm going to go ahead and do another one with a set of UV resin that I know works well with Sophie and Toffee molds, this Lamino hard type resin. I've done it on a video before. Now, the reason I don't think the needle nose applicator is really going to be a big problem here is because even on their pictures from their website, there are a ton of bubbles left on their dice and ledges, which you'd think they would clean up if they really wanted to show off how well these are made, or that they could be made well without ledges from flashing or bubbles from UV resin. But as you can see here, I have huge gaps and voids because there's no way to get the air bubbles out of a mold this tiny. The sprue holes are so tiny, the air just has no way to escape if you're using UV resin. If you had a pressure pot, which is why the AB resin works, it would be great because you could reduce the bubbles enough to where resin could fill in the gaps and the voids. But when you're using UV resin like this, it doesn't really have a choice but to leave the voids in there. I'm certain that there's a way to do UV and pressure at the same time, but not for the regular person who's at home, which are the people who want these molds. Now, I've been saying a lot of negative things about these molds, so let me say something positive that I was surprised to learn. I'm using some Citadel Lead Belcher paint here, and I thought when I was trying to ink these that there was no way that I could get paint to stick down into the number slots for a die this small, that the paint just wouldn't stay. But as you'll see here, it actually works really well. The numbers are deep enough to where you can actually keep some paint down in there and get a well-inked die out of it to where, hey, I could actually read this thing. I'm not going to ink a whole set of these things. However, I do think the little D20 is kind of cute, and it has its own novelty uses because I could definitely put this inside another die. However, when talking about these things, I think I should talk about another product that exists by Whiz Dice called the Halfling's Haversack. I'm not sponsored by them, but I do think the comparison between two tiny styles of dice is pretty cool because theirs are professionally made. They have the regular, almost Chessex style rounded edges. Compared to my 25mm ones, they are 10mm, which even compared to the 8mm D20 that we have here, looks ginormous. I think the 10mm size of these dice are way better and can be read more easily. Remember, I'm in 4K and super zoomed in, and so I can still barely read the tiny D20 that I have mixed in there compared to the rest of them. And if I tried to sand these things down, I would absolutely ruin them, let alone it being very hard to sand them. I just don't think it's a skill that can be shared between tiny dice and larger. Wait, did somebody say Skillshare? I am so good at transition. Thank you to Skillshare for sponsoring this video. If you haven't heard of them before, they're an online learning community with thousands of inspiring classes for creative and curious people to explore new skills or deepen existing passions, like my passions for transitions. Skillshare offers classes designed for real life and all that entails. It's designed with learning in mind, so there are going to be no ads, and they're always launching a ton of new premium classes. With membership being less than $10 $10 a month for an annual subscription. It's a great way to learn a new hobby or advance your skill set for your individual career. I've been doing exactly that because I've been looking up classes on taking pictures and photographs of small things to make them look better so that I'm better at Instagram and Twitter because I'm currently god-awful. Freddie Neubauer has a great class on mastering jewelry and small product photography on Skillshare, which I think is worth it if you are a dice maker and you're wanting to learn how to make your pictures pop and be even better so that people want to actually buy your dice on Etsy. So let me help us both out because the first 1,000 people to use the link in my description will get a free trial of Skillshare Premium membership. Thank you again to Skillshare for sponsoring this video. On to the glamour shots where I can talk about if I actually like this dice mold or not. And I gotta say, no. However, the dice mold is like $7, and if you're gonna use it to make dice that go inside other dice, trying to do a sort of diceception type thing, sure, when it's that tiny, it's really not gonna matter, and you're not gonna see that big of a difference. But if you're looking to have a set of dice that you can say, yeah, these are balanced, I can roll them on the table, and I can hang with the big dice, this isn't going to be it. You could definitely make your own set of dice using a cap mold system far easier, and especially for a company that predominantly focuses on UV resin. UV resin is not ideal here, and that may just be me. There are probably people who can do it better, but for me, that's my opinion. I don't think this mold is worth it. However, I am excited to possibly give the newer molds that I have and the Dice Vault mold that I ordered from them a shot because those look promising and they look like they've improved quite a few things on there. Maybe I'll even try and make my own versions of tiny dice molds like this if y'all are interested in seeing them to see if we can improve on the design. Thank you so much for watching. Let me know if there are other pre-made molds you might want me to test. There are a lot of them out there now and it's getting close to the holiday season, so I know a lot of people are going to be buying, and if they can make an informed decision before they buy for the holidays, that might be worth it. Consider subscribing if you might want to learn how to make your own dice molds from scratch, or if we do a follow-up to this video. Thank you again, and I hope that you have a fantastic day.